join me in welcoming him to Wabash.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you very much for the invitation. Believe me, it is a great pleasure to be here and to have the opportunity to talk to you. I have talked also to some of the students at lunch. Other professors in normal academic institutions take sabbaticals in order to do research. I take sabbatical in order to teach. Well, I tend to do that in Argentina, by the way, in Buenos Aires, so it will also be some fun. And I never accept invitations to speak in some of the elite universities, Harvard, Yale, and so on. I always prefer to speak in small colleges or universities where students don't often have the opportunity to not listen to me, but to have a chance to get an idea of what are new innovations in research. And this is reflected by the choice of my subject, which is quite unusual, a history of the night in the ancient world. A book on the subject does not exist. There are works on symposium, on sex and dreams, but there is no attempt to write a comprehensive history of the night. So again, thank you very much, and I'll start with...
Shall I turn down the light?
Yes. Okay. Of course, I'm not going to tell you everything that happened during the night in ancient Greece, although being in an all-male community of students makes some things easier. So let me start with two images. The first is a painting by Frederick Leighton, created in 1884 in London, in Sydney, based on the story of Simon and Iphigenia from the Decameron. It represents a sleeping girl in Cyprus called Iphigenia. She has nothing to do with the famous Iphigenia, and Simon, the son of the king, an imbecile and a brute, who was living away from the palace. According to the story, by falling in love, but also showing restraint and morality, this Simon became a wise man. The idyllic scene takes place early in the night, when darkness starts to fall and the rising moon illuminates the sleeping beauty. In Leighton's words, this specific time of day is the most mysteriously beautiful in the whole 24 hours. The painting is based on oppositions: the light skin of the girl and the dark skin of the man, her relaxed body that extends into space and the reserved posture of the man, the unconsciousness of sleep and the consciousness of observation and moral restraint, light and darkness, the calmness of inertia and the tension of unfulfilled erotic desire. The second image is a contemporary painting made only 1 year earlier in 1883 by William Adolphe Bouguereau in his La Nuit. The night is depicted as a partially nude woman floating in the air above the seacoast, chased away by the approaching sunrise. The sky above is still lit with stars. The painting too is based on the opposition between the darkness of the dress and the brightness of the white skin. The sensuality of the naked body creates an erotic mood. But unlike Leighton's painting, this image is filled with movement. The movement of the birds and the movement of the night, an eternal, never-ending movement, the succession of night and day that creates the time frame for life of every living creature. I have selected these two images because somehow they epitomize some of the questions that I will be addressing this evening. I have given several talks on the subject of the night. This is the first time that I'm actually talking about the night during the night. Although these images are not Greek, they are inspired by Greek myths. set at dusk and dawn, at the transition from light to darkness, these images provide the universal definition of the night. The night, and this definition holds true whether you are in Helsinki today or in pharaonic Egypt thousands of years ago, the night is the time between sunset and sunrise. The two images allude to important aspects of the perception and reality of the night: sleep and dream, erotic desire and anxiety, inertia and movement, the importance of light, and the function of the darkness as an enhancer of emotions and senses. Let us look again at La Nuit. Bouguereau's painting brings us to the core of the problem of the history of the night. The movement of time is circular, reflecting the movement of the earth around the sun and the moon around the earth, and guaranteeing that the day will always be followed by the night, and the night will always be followed by the day. By contrast, the movement of history is not circular, it is linear, leading from one phase of human culture to the next. As an astronomical phenomenon, the night does not have a history. Does it have one as a cultural phenomenon? As I shall argue, nightlife as a social and cultural phenomenon is subject to change. Everything that fills the night with life, from the economic, political, social, cultural, and religious activities of humans to the behavior of animals. Everything that stimulates the senses, from shadows, street illumination, the moonlight, the odor of night flowers, or the touching of a naked body in the darkness, to the barking of dogs, the rhythmical call of the owl, the snoring of an old man, or the blaring of a car alarm, or the noise of revelers, and everything that humans experience during the night, from dreams of the unwelcome visit of ghosts to pirate attacks, all of this differs depending on a vast array of factors, including species, age, gender, social position, occupation, and historical context. As you see, the subject is complex, so it is not surprising that no one has yet attempted to write a history of the night from the beginnings to today. A nocturnal banquet is experienced differently by the host and his guests, the slave who serves and the flute girl who entertains. Waking up late in the morning is often a privilege of the higher social strata. Religious faith may lead to interruptions of sleep for prayer. Mannerisms may also play a significant role in differentiating the experience of the night. For instance, it is somehow believed that insomnia leads to good poetry or good PhD dissertations or undergraduate papers. The activities that unfold and the experiences that are sustained during the night depend on constantly changing factors that may range from technology and the organization of labor to religion. The invention of electricity, for instance, revolutionized nightlife. 24-hour TV and radio have had a tremendous impact on our lives since their inception, and the development of aviation, radars, and infrared have increased the horrors of warfare. The obligatory nocturnal prayers in Christianity and Islam have had an impact on behavior during the night. Such diverse factors explain why nightclubs have only existed since the 19th century, why some societies have evening dresses and others do not, why segmented sleep prevailed in pre-industrial European culture. Actually, to sleep for 8 hours was an invention of the 19th century. Before that, there was always fragmented sleep. Why specific forms of music, literature, and visual art are associated with the night, such as the nocturne or the Nachtmusik, the Gothic novel, and the symbolic dialogue, the film noir, and the horror movie. In this talk, I will first briefly discuss certain universal and more or less perennial aspects of human perceptions of the night and explain how such perceptions influence the representation of the night. I shall argue that the association of the night with a relatively standard set of concepts and feelings determines how it is represented in the textual evidence, leading in part to its misrepresentation. Then I will discuss the tension between these conservative, almost unalterable perceptions and the continually changing reality of the night. One of my favorite songs is Cole Porter's Night and Day, as performed by Ella Fitzgerald and not Frank Sinatra. You may know the words, night and day, you are the one, only you beneath the moon and under the sun, whether near to me or far, it's no matter, darling, where you are, I think of you night and day. What this song expresses is the polarity of day and night, an opposition that has prevailed for thousands of years. Because of this polarity, night is a so-called marked word, as the linguist would say, a term that carries special social and cultural connotations, giving emphasis to a statement, and in this case, enhancing an emotional display. In Porter's song, the intensity of desire can be really expressed only when the partition of day and night is lifted and the two become a continuum. To say, I love you, is one thing. To follow the statement, I love you, with the words, by day, would probably fail to generate much enthusiasm. But to say, I love you, day and night, is an emphatic, unconditional profession of emotion. This usage, appearing in a variety of contexts, has not changed for thousands of years. In a letter written in Egypt, for those of you who learn Greek, I have included the Greek text as well. Oops. Back. What have I done? Yes. In a letter written in Egypt 1900 years ago, a man implores the wife who had abandoned him. I want you to know that ever since you left me, I have been in mourning, weeping at night and lamenting during the day. Statius, a Latin poet, in his Sylvae, addresses his wife in almost exactly the same words, asking her why she sorrows by day and fetches painful sighs in the night, passing it with him in sleepless worry. A writer's employment of the night, in all its markedness, can also underline the weight of a commitment or a wish. This is why we often find the expression by day and by night in ritual texts such as oaths, charms, and curses. If night is marked as a word, this is partly because the night as an interval of time has been marked since the dawn of humanity. From primeval times, when artificial light was provided by fire burning in a cave or a shelter, giving warmth and protecting from wild animals, humans engaged in a limited repertoire of nocturnal activities. The night provided time for recreation, for sex and sleep, for the joint consumption of food, for storytelling, singing and dancing around the fire, and for watching the stars and observing the phases of the moon. Of these activities, only storytelling is allowed during this evening talk. Furthermore, it offered the opportunity for dreaming and the experience of supernatural phenomena. Finally, the night was connected with dangers and the increased need for security measures. Although life in many historical periods has reached extremely high levels of sophistication, the principal activities, experiences, and perceptions of the night have demonstrated surprising persistence. The night never ceased to require defense measures. It has remained the privileged time for supernatural phenomena. People continue dreaming of dead relatives, and they still believe that the position of the stars and the phases of the moon influence their fortune and behavior. Perennially, the night provides the setting for conviviality in small groups, the family, the members of exclusive associations, conspirators, and on special occasions it gathers masses of the like-minded in all-night celebrations and vigils. So the night has been enduringly associated with a certain set of perceptions. It plays a great part in the creation of a sense of togetherness. Initiation rites in secret societies usually take place in the night. It is intimately linked with fear and anxiety, but also with erotic desire. I show here some images of ancient vases. For every ancient viewer, these are images of the night. There are scenes of the sack of Troy that take place during the night, the Trojan horse, the rape of Cassandra, the killing of Priam. All these images that we look at, we don't realize that they are actually nocturnal scenes. For an ancient viewer, they were immediately associated with the night. I don't need to explain these images. And as the night commonly occasions sleep and dreaming, it is associated with death and is regarded as the most effectual time for the communication between mortals and the gods, the living and the dead. The fact that the night is a marked time period and that the term night is a marked word can easily be recognized in ancient texts whose authors chose to mention the fact that an incident took place in the night because this enhanced emotional arousal. For instance, the explicit reference of the authors of Hellenistic decrees to the fact that an enemy attack occurred during the night amplified the feeling of danger and increased the gratitude toward those who had averted it. Because of the association of the night with fear, it is more likely that we will be told that a dangerous or frightful event occurred during the night than, for example, that a fisherman spread his net in the calm sea in the moonlight, or that a sailor followed the stars. Because the night is oversexed, we get more information about erotic desire and the composition of love poetry in the night by sleepless men than about resting after toilsome work in the fields. Too often, explicit references to the night function as enhancers of emotional responses and magnifiers of the emotional impact of a narrative. For instance, if you look in Thucydides, you will notice that ships sail during the night, but it's always the ships of the enemies, never the ships of the Athenians. Of course, the Athenians sailed during the night, but the fact that the enemy ship is mentioned as sailing during the night creates the feeling of danger, increased danger, also of cowardice. They don't do it during the day, and so on. So using the night is, or the night is a medium by ancient authors in order to create certain feelings. This is why we have direct references to the fact that an earthquake occurred during the night. Earthquakes, believe me, occur also during the day. But to mention the fact that it was during the night increases the fear. The night is further exploited to highlight the outstanding character of an achievement or the occurrence of something extraordinary. Consequently, by simply collecting references to the night in literary sources, inscriptions and papyri, it is unlikely that we will grasp the complexity and specificity of the night in a given historical period. Since these references may be influenced by the function of the night as an intensifier of emotion, the image that we will construct based on such sources will be distorted. Some phenomena, sex and violence, will be overrepresented. Night stories, of which we have a plenty, are valuable as sources of information, but the sum of night stories is not a history of the night. Let us see such a night story, in fact the mother of all night stories set in a classical Greek polis. It is a narrative given by Euphiletos, the defendant in Lysias' speech on the murder of Eratosthenes, and I understand that some of you may have read this text. Explaining the circumstances under which Euphiletos killed his wife's lover, he describes nighttime activities in a non-Athenian household in the early 4th century. Let's see the text. I have a modest 2-story house, which has equal space for the women's and men's quarters on the upper and lower floors. When our child was born, its mother nursed it, and so that she would not risk a fall on her way downstairs whenever the baby needed bathing, I took to living at the upper level while the women lived downstairs. From that time then, it became such a regular arrangement that my wife would often go downstairs to sleep with the child, to nurse it, and to stop it crying. This was the way we lived for quite a while, and I never had any cause for concern, but carried on in the fool's belief that my wife was the most proper woman in the city. Time passed, gentlemen, and I came home unexpectedly from the farm. After dinner, the child started to cry and become restless. It was being deliberately provoked by our slave girl into behaving like this because that individual, his wife's lover, was in the house. I found out all about this later. So I told my wife to go away and nurse the child to stop it crying. To begin with, she did not want to go, claiming that she was glad to see me home after so long. When I got annoyed and ordered her to leave, she said, "Yes, so that you can have a go at the young slave here. You made a grab at her before." Well, like President Trump. Before when we were drunk. I laughed and she got up, closed the door as she left, pretending it was a joke, and drew the bolt across. Thinking there was nothing serious in this and not suspecting a thing, I happily settled down to sleep as I had come back from my farm work. About dawn, my wife returned and opened the door. When I asked why the door had made a noise in the night, she claimed that the lamp near the baby had gone out, and so she had gone to get a light from the neighbors. I said nothing, as I believed this was the truth. I noticed, though, gentlemen, that her face was made up, although her brother had died not 13 days earlier. Then the defendant explains how he received information concerning his wife's extramarital adventures and prepared a plan to catch the seducer. Sostratos is my friend, and he is well disposed towards me. I met him at sunset as he was coming home from his farm. Realizing that none of his family would be at home at that time to welcome him on his return, I invited him to have dinner with me. We came to my house, went upstairs, and had dinner. After he had had a good meal, he left, and I went to bed. Eratosthenes came in, gentlemen, this is the lover, and the girl woke me immediately and informed me that he was inside. I told her to mind the door and went downstairs, leaving without making a sound. I went around to different neighbors and found that some were not at home and others were out of town. Gathering the largest group I could find of those who were at home, I made my way back to the house. We took torches from the nearest inn and entered. The door was open because the girl had seen to it. We pushed open the door of the bedroom, and those of us who were the first to enter saw him still lying next to my wife. The ones who coming in later saw him standing naked on the bed. I struck him, gentlemen, and knocked him down. Then I twisted him round and tied his hands behind his back. I asked him why he was disgracing my house by entering it. He confessed that he was in the wrong, and he begged and entreated me not to kill him, but to agree to a financial settlement. I said to him, "Your executioner is not I, but the law of the city, whose violation you thought less important than your pleasure. It was your choice to commit an offense like that against my wife and my children, rather than to obey the laws and behave properly." And of course, he kills him. This passage provides interesting information about aspects of Athenian nights, some more familiar than others: dining, getting drunk, having sex, inviting a friend, spending time in an inn, and having the segmented sleep that seems to have been quite common in European culture before the invention of the uninterrupted 8-hour sleep at the time of the Industrial Revolution. A sleep often interrupted by various activities, going to the neighbors to get light, feeding a child, opening the door to receive a lover, going to the neighbors to seek help, going to an inn to get torches, arresting and killing an adulterer. This passage also clearly indicates the historical dimensions of the night. We observe that the night is experienced in different manner by the infant and the grown-ups, the man and the woman, the master and the slave, the farmer who returns from the fields exhausted, and those who still have the energy to go to an inn, the inhabitants of the urban center, and the population of the countryside. Such parameters that differentiate the way the night is experienced differ both synchronically from one culture to another and diachronically from one historical period to another. The reality of the night was not the same in a Cretan city in which common meals in the men's houses continued to take place until the Roman conquest, or in the harbor town of the small island of Anafi, fearing the attacks of pirates, or in Chalkis, under the control of a Macedonian garrison. The impact of parameters such as those mentioned before make the night into a subject of historical inquiry. For a diachronic historical study of the night, we need a different approach. We need to recognize significant developments over a relatively long historical period and to examine their impact on the night, the way they increase the tension between the conservative perception of the night on the one hand and the continually changing reality. As I shall argue, from roughly the mid-4th century BC onwards, we observe in the world of the Greek cities an effort to gradually infiltrate the territory of the night with the activities and behavior patterns of the day, a drive to make the night brighter, safer, and more efficient. Important factors that set this process in motion include the greater mobility of persons, stronger urbanization, and these are at the same time the basic features of the period that I call the long Hellenistic age, the period between, let's say, Alexander the Great and the late second century AD. Changes in the position of women, the advancement of monarchy, wider diffusion of mystery cults than ever before, the introduction of new forms of communal organization, the voluntary associations, the strong dependence of cities on benefactors, and the aristocratization of society, advancements in technology, science, and technical literature, and in the Hellenistic period also incessant war and violence. I am not claiming that any of the phenomena that I will be discussing appear for the first time in the 4th century or during the later centuries. We do, however, observe first the culmination of pre-existing trends, and second, an unprecedented diffusion of institutions and phenomena that were only sporadically attested in earlier periods. A few examples, and I will be brief in this second part of my talk. Private clubs are a case in point. Private clubs are already attested in Athens in the early 6th century BC. But we have to wait until the Hellenistic period, after Alexander the Great, to find significant evidence for private voluntary associations in many urban centers and not only in Athens. They spread especially in cities in which large numbers of foreign immigrants lived, where they served as a basis for communality and identity. Private associations were also the basis of religious worship for larger groups than ever before or before the conquest of Alexander. What is the impact of this phenomenon on the night? Why am I starting with the voluntary associations? Although the criteria for membership varied across the different types of associations, regular banqueting and convivial drinking was common to all of them. Sometimes this convivial drinking took place only once a month, on a particular day from which the association derived its name. For instance, the Noumeniastai from Noumenia, the first day of the month, gathered on the first day of the month. The Decatistai from Deca, 10, on the 10th day of the month, and so on. Of course, you would be a member of several clubs, and so you would participate in the first, and the second, and the third, and so on. Not all gatherings occurred after sunset, but conviviality in the night is sometimes explicitly mentioned in the sources. For instance, an Athenian club in the 2nd century AD had officials called panihistai, that is, those who conduct service during the all-night celebration. The nature of whose service is not precisely known. Perhaps they maintained order during the nocturnal gatherings of the club. As we can infer from member lists of associations, and here we see the second impact of associations on nightlife, membership was often open to representatives also of the lower social strata, that is, the social groups that in the past were excluded from the nocturnal drinking parties typically held by the wealthy elite. Voluntary associations accepted foreigners, craftsmen, slaves, and in some cases also women as members. With the diffusion of private associations and nighttime activity typically associated with the propertied classes was opened on specific days to larger groups of the population. A second example, which is connected with the existence of private benefactors in cities. Private benefactors spent money in order to keep the gymnasia and the baths open during the night. In the imperial period, supervisors of the gymnasia are sometimes praised for having abundantly supplied oil night and day, or for a large part of the night, thus expanding the operation of these facilities. It is noteworthy that on those occasions, access was provided to people of every age and property class, to citizens and foreigners, free individuals and slaves, men and women. Although baths were typically visited before sunset and dinner, there were exceptions. Thanks to the generosity of benefactors, for instance, in Stratonicaea in Asia Minor during the 2nd and early 3rd centuries AD, the baths of men and women remained open for a significant part of the night during the festivals of Zeus and Hera. I read one of many texts of this kind. A priest and his wife in the city offered a complete banquet in the gymnasium to all the citizens, the foreigners, and the slaves. They also offered a banquet to all the women, those of citizen status, the free women, and the slaves. They organized a contest at their own expense, paying for the most celebrated shows throughout the day and for a large part of the night. And they offered olive oil to every property and age class in both baths, both day and night, to all the people, both to the locals and to the foreigners who had arrived as visitors. A phenomenon directly associated with the rise of private associations is the diffusion of cults with an initiatory aspect. People got initiated into a mystery cult in order to expect better protection in life and a better afterlife after death. Associations of worshippers of Dionysus, associations of worshippers of the Egyptian gods, and later associations of worshippers of the so-called Oriental deities. Nocturnal ceremonies played an important part in all these exclusive religious groups, engendering feelings of exclusivity and a sense of identity, and insinuating a direct communication between mortals and gods through dreams and stage epiphanies. Thus, they increased the number of nocturnal religious activities, especially in cosmopolitan urban centers. The sanctuary of the great gods in Samothrace, for instance, had been an important religious center for northern Greece and the northern Aegean, but it did not rise to pan-Hellenic prominence until the 3rd century BC, as the large number of lists of initiates demonstrates. Cult associations that celebrated rites labeled as mysteries spread in the course of the Hellenistic period, although they reached the greatest distribution in the imperial period. I have time only for one example. Inscribed gold tablets were placed in the graves of the initiates as tokens of their initiation. They were usually placed on the mouth of the deceased person in order to remind him or her of the words they were supposed to say as soon as they reached the underworld. If you say the right words, then you get to the better place in the underworld. If you don't, then tough. You get reincarnation. If you were a good person, you are reborn as a king. If you were a bad person, you are reborn as a dog, or even worse. So, although this practice was not an innovation of the Hellenistic period, all tablets, all, no exception, for mainland Greece and Crete date to the period after 350, between 300 and 50 BC. There can be no doubt that the popularity of initiation in private mystery cults increased in the Hellenistic period. It follows that nocturnal religious activities beyond the public celebrations were far more frequent than ever before. As the mobility of people and ideas increased in the imperial period, the nocturnal ceremonies of one cult could easily become trendsetters that influence other cults. Again, one example. When in the 140s AD, a certain Alexandros founded the cult of the snake god Glykon, new Asclepios at Abonu Teikos, he synthesized elements drawn from healing, divination, and mystery cults. You have here a statue of this strange god. It was a snake, but as you can see, it is a snake with very big ears to listen to prayers, with long hair like Pythagoras, so it is a philosophical snake. Alexander used tricks in order to make the snakes speak and give oracles and so on. Fascinating text by Lucian, this Alexander or the false prophet, but I don't have time, of course, here to describe all the tricks. But just time for the main festival. The highlight of the festival was the performance of a sacred drama during the night, which certainly imitated practices from the sanctuary of Eleusis. I quote from Lucian: "The third day was called the Day of Torches, and torches were lighted. Finally, the love of the moon and Alexander was represented, and the birth of Rutilianus' daughter." Rutilianus was the governor of the province, and his daughter had married this false prophet Alexander. Alexander, the new Endymion, the lover of the moon, served as torchbearer and mystical expounder. While he lay as if he were asleep, there came down to him from the roof, as if from heaven, not the moon goddess, but a certain Rutilia, a most beautiful woman, wife of one of the emperor's stewards, who was truly in love with Alexander, and he with her. And before the eyes of that rascal, her husband, they engaged in kisses and embraces in public. And if there had not been that many torches, very quickly copulation would have occurred. So, no need to say that this is a nocturnal celebration. Another example, an instructive example of nocturnal rites is found in an inscription from Thessaloniki concerning a private endowment for a cult association of worshippers of Dionysus in the 1st century AD. The sponsors' declared aim was to ensure the continuation of the rites that were performed on 3 nights of different months. The members of the association took an oath that they would preserve the ritual of bread distribution at midnight on those days. The Christians joined the other religious groups that held meetings between sunset and sunrise. Sometimes we think that the Christians gathered during the night because they were persecuted. They gathered during the night because every religious group in the Roman Empire gathered during the night. No group gathered during the day, period. So the Christians were not behaving in any different manner than all the others. Similarly, Philo gives a vivid description of nocturnal spiritual activities and wine consumption among the Jewish Therapeutai, the worshippers in Egypt in the early 1st century AD. And you see how certain practices get fused in because of the influence of trendsetters. I quote the text: "After the supper, they hold the sacred vigil. They rise up all together and, standing in the middle of the refectory, form themselves first into 2 choirs, one of men and one of women. Then they sing hymns to God composed of many measures and set to many melodies, sometimes chanting together, sometimes taking up the harmony antiphonally, hands and feet keeping time in accompaniment, and rapt with enthusiasm reproduce sometimes the lyrics of the procession, sometimes of the halt, and of the wheeling and counter-wheeling of a choric dance. Then, having drunk, as in the Bacchic rites of the strong wine of God's love, they mix and both together become a single choir. Thus they continue till dawn, drunk with this drunkenness in which there is no shame. Following this general trend, and possibly influenced by the rituals of mystery cults and cult associations, regular ceremonies in temples after sunset and before sunrise became common also in public civil cults. A particular religious activity that exclusively took place in the night acquired unprecedented prominence: incubation and koimesis, the oracular and healing sanctuaries. What is enkoimesis? Enkoimesis, which is only sporadically attested in the 5th century BC and becomes very common later, means that a patient goes to a sanctuary, spends the night there, sleeps, and expects the god, the healing god, to appear in the dream and either explain the nature of the disease or offer healing. Incubation became a prominent feature of religious behavior in the Hellenistic and imperial periods, and numerous sanctuaries of healing gods acquired special facilities that allowed worshippers suffering from illness and anxieties to spend the night expecting to be visited by a god in the dream and to be cured or given instructions. Humans have had dreams for thousands of years, but the construction of incubation halls for dream encounters with the gods is a phenomenon belonging to a specific cultural context. A related phenomenon is, for instance, the rise of onirocritica, dream interpreters, and books about dream interpretation. Here you see the advertisement by a dream interpreter in Hellenistic Egypt. He doesn't give his name, but he gives his origin. I'm Creta, so I can give good explanation of dreams. Presumably, when some people talked about dreaming to the gods, other people also started having, there's an interesting story. Why it isn't moving? Okay, got it. Just an example of the importance of dreams. In the city of Miletus, an inscription from the 2nd century AD shows how the intense dream experience of a few individuals could become a trendsetter. The inscription contains the inquiry of a priestess of Demeter, Alexandra, who was startled at the fact that people of every gender and age in her city suddenly had epiphanic dreams. They started seeing the gods. For the gods have never been so apparent through dreams as from the day she received the priesthood, both in the dreams of girls and in those of married women, both in the dreams of men and in those of children. What is this? And is it auspicious? Presumably, when some people talked about dreaming of the gods, other people also started having similar dreams, and soon a wave of dreams had afflicted the community. The strong awareness of the importance of dreams and the strong interest in communicating dream experiences to others explain the increased number of dedications upon dream. Since the night is often associated with dangers, real or imaginary, private and public, it is not surprising that measures were taken also for guarding forts and military camps, and policing and protecting urban populations during the night. It is from the Hellenistic period on that we observe an increase in the quantity and variety of measures pertaining to safety. For instance, if someone committed a crime during the night, he was punished with death. If he committed exactly the same crime during daytime, he paid 50 drachmas. The diffusion of the office of the gynaikonomoi, the supervisors of women, who supervised the conduct of women in cities and protected them, especially during nocturnal festivals, is truly an innovation, a Hellenistic innovation, directly connected with two significant developments: the increased visibility of women in public space and the frequency of nocturnal religious activities. Relevant measures are more numerous and systematic with regard also to the defense efforts of cities. Military handbooks, a new type of technical treatises, gives information about the introduction of night guards and night watches. The importance given to the protection during the night is also evident by a letter sent by Augustus to Cnidos in 6 BC. It concerns a man accused for the death of an enemy, who alongside some companions had been harassing him 3 nights long. When a slave tried to empty a chamber pot on the assailants who were besieging the house, the pot fell and killed one of them. So in his letter, Augustus expresses his indignation that someone was put in trial for defending his own house during the night. Right? I am amazed that you do not show indignation against those who deserve to suffer every punishment, since they attacked another's house 3 times at night with violence and force and were destroying the common security of all. But apart from the general concern with the security of all, political authorities and statesmen were also interested in preventing subversive actions during the night. How the times of night served to shield political dissenters during the imperial period has been immortalized in a famous scene in Monty Python's Life of Brian, the best movie ever made on an ancient theme. A member of the People's Court of Judea is assigned the task to cover a wall with the phrase Romans go home. If he successfully deals with the syntactic and grammatical challenges of Latin, it is with the help of a native speaker. Romani ite domum is the most famous Latin graffito. It reflects a practice that is well attested in the literary sources. During Augustus' reign, in late 1st century BC, the philosopher Athenodoros returned from Rome to his hometown of Tarsos in southern Turkey. When he found the city dominated by the poet and demagogue Boethos, he used the authority given to him by Augustus to send Boethos and his followers into exile. Thereupon, and now I quote Strabo, Boethos' partisans wrote against him on the walls, "Deeds are for the young, counsels for the middle-aged, but hearts for the old men." When Athenodoros took the inscription as a joke, he ordered that thunders for old men be added to it. But then someone who despised all decency and had a loose belly came in the night to his house and profusely bespattered the door and the wall. And when Athenodoros brought accusations in the assembly against that faction, he said, "One may recognize the city's illness and disaffection in many ways, and in particular from its excrement." End of quotation. Many graffiti written with charcoal or painted on walls, especially those with aggressive text, insults, and obscene vocabulary, were written during the night. Tomorrow I'm giving a lecture about graffiti in Aphrodite. Is actually one of another 3 lectures that I'm giving tomorrow in various classes. As I was telling some of my colleagues here, there is a proverbial saying in Greek: we found a priest, let's bury the entire village. So we find a lecturer, so let's invite him in all classes with great joy. So, the intensification of entertainment, social interaction, and religious worship, and I end with this, in the night was certainly not the result of coordinated efforts, but it originated in the convergence of social, political, and religious developments, not technology, as in our times. It is not technology that brought the change. And although there was no such thing as a systematic or theoretical approach to the night in antiquity, human behavior during the night became the object of observation and discourse. In Seneca's time, a certain Sextus Papinius was known as Lychnobius, the one living under the light of the lamp. The use of a Greek word to describe the life of a man who had reversed the functions of day and night suggests the existence of a Greek discourse on the subject. The Pedagogus of Clemens of Alexandria, written around 200 AD, prescribes to the Christians a nocturnal behavior that is contrasted with what we must regard as a common practice. Clemens did not recommend continuous sleep, but rather to fill the night with activities other than banquets accompanied by music and excessive drinking. His readers should often rise by night and bless God and devote themselves to literature and art. Women should turn to the distaff. People should fight against sleep in order to partake of life for a longer period through wakefulness. As the nights in the cities of the Roman Empire were filled with life, we observe an interest in thoroughly exploiting the potential of the night. The awareness of the possibilities offered by the night for the communication between humans and superhuman powers is reflected by probably lost it. There was a slide with the handbook of magic. Anyway, you can imagine it with a lot of funny images. Newly popular handbooks on magic and the inducement of the sending of dreams appeared. Matz's handbooks on sieges and tactics responded to the challenge of darkness and took advantage of the strategic possibilities it offered. Technical treatises about curses tapped the potential of the night for communication with supernatural powers. This technical literature of the night was designed to improve the lives of those who used it and make the lives of their enemies miserable. The intensification of nightlife is reflected by material culture as well, especially by the development of the hydraulic clock that made the measurement of the time during the night possible. Astronomical mechanisms, such as the Antikythera mechanism, elaborate types of lamps and lanterns. One of the greatest technological discoveries of the ancient world is this. It is a lamp which is made of glass and not of clay, because when it hangs from the ceiling, it permits the illumination of a whole room, whereas these lamps cannot achieve this. Although we have direct textual reference to street lighting in large urban centers, such as Ephesus and Antioch, only in late antiquity, there is earlier archaeological and literary evidence for the lighting of torches and lamps by the owners of shops and houses, as well as the administrators of baths and temples. It is reasonable to assume that the colonnaded streets that become a common feature of urban centers in the East from the 1st century BC on were illuminated in the night with torches. In his Alephes Historia, the True History, Lucian narrates how he visited the city in the skies between the Pleiades and the Hyades, the Lychnopolis, the city of the lamps. It was exclusively inhabited by lamps, some small and humble, others large and resplendent. Lamps had been serving people for centuries, but to make them the inhabitants of a city of lights is not only to be attributed to Lucian's genius, but also to an awareness of the importance of illumination that was only possible in the late 2nd century AD and unthinkable in the past. Perhaps the equivalent of this imaginary state in our contemporary world would be a city inhabited by smartphones. In the mid-4th century AD, the historian Ammianus Marcellinus compared the brightness of the streets of Antioch by night with the light of the day. His contemporary, the orator Libanius, would declare the victory of day over the night. Their tyranny of sleep had been defeated. I quote, "The torch of the sun is followed by other lamps, surpassing in brightness the lamp festival of the Egyptians. In our city, night and day differ only in the form of the light. As regards the various crafts, night and day do not differ. Some conduct skillful work with their hands, others laugh gently and turn to song." In many disparate areas of life, we observe the effort to make the night safer, brighter, more efficient, and more full of life. The study of Greco-Roman nights, a study that still needs to be conducted systematically, shows that in addition to the role played by technology, the historical dimension of the night is much determined by social and cultural factors. Indeed, one may be tempted to ask, whether the impact of technology on the night in the modern period has been overestimated. Do we have nightlife because of technology, or do we have technology in order to have nightlife? Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you for your talk. Would you be willing to take a couple of questions?
Do I have a choice?
I don't know, but maybe we won't have questions. I do have a comment for you. You do know that Cole Porter is from Indiana, right?
No,
So there you go.
Wow.
I believe Cole Porter's from Indiana, is that right? Yeah.
Yep.
From Peru, somewhere. Any questions for Dr. Chaniotis? Thinking about the night, David.
I had one. I thought I heard you say at one point that all religious ceremonies were held at night.
Not all religious ceremonies or ceremonies of religious groups, not the public ceremonies of the city,
Okay.
but of the Mithra, the Mithras, the worshippers of the Egyptian cults, the worshippers of Dionysus. Every religious group that has some form of exclusiveness, not the religious groups of public religion, they gather in the night and they celebrate during the night. And interestingly, this has an impact on also public celebrations. For instance, I didn't have time to give details about that. We know from Epidaurus, the sanctuary of Asclepios, from an inscription from the 2nd century AD, that a service was introduced. It describes the activities of the priest who has to visit every single shrine and make sure that the lamps are lit, sing certain songs, and then move on. And it is explicitly stated that this takes place after sunset. We have
Yes.
another inscription from elsewhere in Asia Minor, where there is daily ceremony at sunset and at sunrise. It's not during middle of the night, during the night, but it is in this liminal period of sunrise and sunset.
Because what was in the back of my mind was that famous decree of the Senate against the
Bacchanal.
worshippers of.
Well, the Romans are a different story. The Romans hated the night. Everything that happens in the night is either conspiracy or magic, and so on. So that they didn't have a very good relation with the night. Whereas the Greeks, this trend starts a little bit earlier, but only in exceptional cases. For instance, if you read the poetry of Sappho, for Sappho, the night has a potential. There is a poem in where, probably she speaks to herself, everybody's out dancing and so on, and you are sleeping. You are the only one who sleeps. We don't have the rest of the poem, but I'm sure that the continuation would be, stand up, go and join the others. So for Sappho, the night has this potential, but it took centuries for other groups in the Greek world to realize this potential for religion. I didn't mention also economic activities and so on, because this is a subject for which unfortunately, we don't have many sources. Because sometimes it is taken, it's so self-evident that we don't have any references, or hardly any references, to people fishing during the night. And we know from experience that this is extremely common in the Mediterranean. This is precisely why I mentioned at the beginning that simply by collecting references to the night in the sources, we're not going to get the full picture.
Stephen.
Yeah, your answer there suggested a question to me about whether there's the day-night dichotomy is very clear, and if you've lived in Hawaii, as I have, for instance, close to the equator, there's not much between them. You know, the sun goes down and it's dark. But if you live farther north, and the whole Mediterranean is significantly farther north, there's some period between them, sort of twilight, dusk, or dawn, when it's not really day yet, it's not really night yet, it's not totally dark. Is there a characterization,
Yes. Yes.
of that period?
And it is actually one of the most interesting periods. In most cases, when we have interesting narratives about something that happens, it is when the moon starts to rise. So it is not in the middle of the night. It is when you see the moon rising let's say around 9 o'clock after sunset. There is a story, for instance, about Archilochus and how he became a poet. And the story starts that he was sent by his father to sell a cow. And in this inscription, it is mentioned that he started his trip to go to the town when the moon was shining, but it was early in the morning. So this is the time in which the moon is about to set. So this mystical time between day and light, this is what attracts a lot of interest and has great significance. It has also great significance for the worshippers of Theos Hypsistos, the highest god, who is a god influenced by Jewish religion, but nevertheless a pagan god. Most of the rituals for this god, again we know this from an inscription, take place before sunrise. Pliny, when he tortured a couple of slaves to find out what these weird Christians were doing, he narrates this in one of his letters to Trajan. He explains they gather before sunrise. Again, it's not in the night, it is before sunrise when they sing their hymns and so on. So it is the expectation of this change. And this expectation may be different. For the Christians, it is the fear that the day may not come. This is why they have to be alert and vigil and pray. For the others, it is perhaps the other way around, that is to expect the beginning of the night, because in ancient thought, and this is widespread in many countries in the Mediterranean, the day does not begin at sunrise, the day begins at sunset. It is not only the Jewish culture that this was the case, this was widespread. So the beginning of the day is when the sun sets. This is why you expect. So all these are interesting additional aspects of the subject.
Well, I welcome you all. I encourage you all to join us tomorrow to hear more.
Not about the night. No, not
Tomorrow at noon, please join us. We're talking about inscriptions from graffiti, in fact, from Aphrodisias, a site in Asia Minor, in modern-day Turkey. So please join us tomorrow at noon for that if you can. And please have some refreshments and come down and meet Dr. Chaniotis and let us thank him for a wonderful lecture.